Elizabeth sat frozen, phone trembling in her hand, as the results finally popped up. The words felt impossible, almost cruel. According to the DNA test, Chuck wasn't her biological father. Her mind raced, heart pounding like it might break free from her chest. Years of shared birthdays, late-night talks, and family dinners suddenly collided with a harsh, unthinkable reality. Could everything she believed about her life be a lie? Confusion hit first, sharp and disorienting, followed by disbelief so thick it made her stomach churn. Chuck, the man she called Dad, who had been there for every scraped knee and graduation speech, might not even share her DNA. The question that screamed in her head felt impossible to answer. Who would keep a secret this big? And why? Was it love protecting her, fear, or something darker? The tension didn't stay private for long. Every glance, every word, suddenly carried extra weight. Family dinners were no longer about laughter. They were tests of loyalty and patience. Even small interactions seemed loaded, as if each person was tiptoeing around a truth they were too afraid to speak. Identity itself became fragile. Elizabeth began questioning more than her family tree. She questioned herself. Who am I if the person I trusted most might not even be my father? And the legal angles? The Dina result wasn't just a family bomb. It opened the door to courtrooms, paternity challenges, and the kind of paperwork nobody wants to touch. Every step Elizabeth would take next could ripple through relationships, reputations, and hearts. Wait until you see how one small revelation shakes the entire family dynamic. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for answers, but all she found were half-hidden emotions, uncertain stares, and the quiet fear that nothing would ever be the same again. Elizabeth had always thought her life was simple, the kind of ordinary happiness most people only hope for. Growing up, she felt protected, loved, and valued. Chuck had been a constant presence, guiding her through first day of school jitters, teaching her how to ride a bike, and showing up for every milestone with a proud smile. Pam, her mother, was gentle, cautious, the kind of parent who shielded her from the messiness of the world. Andre, Elizabeth's brother, had always been the quiet observer, the one who noticed the small things but rarely spoke up unless pressed. On the surface, their family seemed unshakable, a solid unit, the kind you could count on. But beneath that veneer, subtle tensions were beginning to surface. Elizabeth noticed it first in the smallest ways: a story about her early childhood that didn't match her own memories, photos that seemed out of place, or comments that her parents let slip but immediately retracted. At family dinners, she started picking up on odd pauses, fleeting expressions, and glances exchanged just a moment too late. Chuck would sometimes hesitate before answering her questions. Pam would fidget when certain topics came up, and Andre had this way of looking at her with concern, like he knew something she didn't. Nothing screamed danger, nothing obvious, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at her sense of certainty. Elizabeth began scanning her social media more closely, revisiting old posts, pictures, and birthday announcements. Certain captions didn't line up with what she remembered. Some friends commented on things that seemed off. A casual mention of her birth in a post, a congratulatory message from someone she barely recognized. It was small, but together it formed a puzzle she couldn't ignore. She started questioning not only what she knew about her family, but how well she knew them at all. The first layer of tension was subtle, but persistent. Elizabeth found herself in a strange mix of emotions: loyalty to her family battling a growing unease, curiosity fighting fear, love tangled with doubt. Every minor inconsistency made her heart beat faster. She replayed conversations, overanalyzed smiles, and reread old letters from Chuck and Pam, searching for a clue, an explanation, anything that could make sense of the feeling gnawing at her. Then came the moment that made her pause. Sitting on her bedroom floor, laptop open, she reread a thread of messages she had never paid attention to. One comment from years ago, praising her dad for a milestone he apparently hadn't been around for, made her stomach twist. She froze, trying to rationalize it, telling herself she was imagining things, but the nagging doubt wouldn't leave. It had started as a whisper and was now a roar in the back of her mind. Elizabeth debated her next move with herself. Should she confront her parents directly and risk shattering the calm they had built, or keep digging quietly, looking for more evidence. Each option carried its own weight. Confrontation might lead to immediate answers, or it could ignite conflict that she wasn't ready to handle. Continued investigation could bring clarity, but also more questions, more shadows where she had once felt safe. She knew that whichever path she chose, the life she had known could change forever. Pam's cautious demeanor had always been a shield, protecting the family from conflict. Chuck's calm confidence had been a rock, someone who always seemed to have everything under control. Andre, though quieter, had a keen awareness, often stepping in only when tension escalated. But now, with Elizabeth questioning, that careful balance was trembling. Every interaction felt loaded, every word double-edged. The house no longer seemed like a sanctuary. It was a stage, each family member playing a part, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. Elizabeth's mind raced with possibilities. What if the inconsistencies pointed to something deeper? What if the love she had trusted wasn't aligned with truth? She thought about all the times she had leaned on Chuck for guidance, the advice he had given her, the stories he had told about family history, milestones, and memories. Each memory now felt fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of a table. She realized that love alone might not protect her from disappointment or shock. Even Andre's silence started to feel meaningful. Usually, he would comment, joke, or offer reassurance. But now he seemed to hold himself back. It wasn't avoidance. It felt like caution, like he knew something he wasn't ready to reveal. Elizabeth couldn't tell if it was loyalty to their parents, fear of conflict, or a desire to protect her from a painful truth. The uncertainty became a weight she carried everywhere, making every simple family gathering a calculated dance of observation, deduction, and self-restraint. One evening, Elizabeth found herself staring at a family photo on the living room wall. The picture seemed harmless at first glance. Chuck holding her as a baby, Pam smiling, Andre leaning against the wall. But something felt off. A memory didn't align. A story didn't match. She traced her finger along the edge of the frame, trying to convince herself she was overthinking. That's when she realized she had reached a critical point. Either she asked the questions that had been haunting her for months, or continued living with gnawing uncertainty. Neither option felt safe, and yet staying in limbo was suddenly unbearable. She sat back, rubbing her temples, replaying conversations, scanning old messages, and rereading family posts. The calm had cracked, and the cracks were spreading fast. Every inconsistency was a reminder that something was hidden. And in that moment, Elizabeth understood that the surface of her family's perfect image was thinner than she had imagined, and the truth, once unearthed, could shake everything she had ever believed about her identity and the people she trusted most. This is where the calm cracks begin, and things start spiraling. Elizabeth's thoughts raced late into the night, weighing every possibility, calculating the risk of confrontation, and wondering if she was strong enough to face whatever truth awaited her. She knew that the answers were out there, buried in layers of past decisions, omissions, and carefully preserved facades. One way or another, the family she had known for her entire life was about to change, and there was no turning back. Elizabeth had been bracing herself for months, piecing together inconsistencies, noticing subtle hints, and replaying conversations in her head. But nothing could have truly prepared her for the moment the DNA results landed in her hands. The envelope felt heavier than normal, like it carried not just paper, but a weight she wasn't ready for. She tore it open, her hands trembling, heart racing. Her eyes scanned the first line, then the second, and slowly, the truth hit with the force of a lightning bolt. According to the results, she was allegedly not Chuck's biological daughter. The room seemed to shrink around her. Time slowed. Every sound, birds outside, a distant car, the hum of the refrigerator, faded into silence as Elizabeth struggled to process the words in front of her. Her stomach churned, chest tight, as disbelief collided with a gnawing sense of betrayal. She had grown up trusting Chuck completely, believing the foundation of her life was unshakable. That foundation had just cracked. Chuck's reaction was measured, almost unreadable. He kept his usual calm, but subtle tells gave him away. A slight stiffening of his shoulders, a quick swallow, an almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. These micro movements screamed more than words ever could. He had known the truth, or at least suspected it, but his silence now carried a weight that was both protective and suffocating. Elizabeth looked at him, searching for reassurance, for honesty, and instead, she saw restraint. Pam's reaction was a mirror of fear. Her hands fidgeted with a napkin, eyes darting away from Elizabeth's gaze. She spoke, but her words stumbled, fragmented, hesitant. The truth had landed like a stone in her chest. She had always tried to shield her family from discomfort, but now she realized shielding had turned into hiding. Hiding had become betrayal, whether she intended it or not. Andre, as always, was the quiet observer, calculating each moment before revealing any emotion. He didn't rush to comfort, didn't speak in the first few minutes. His silence was not absence, it was caution. He understood the ramifications of this revelation and knew that saying the wrong thing could escalate the chaos. But inside, his mind was racing. Questions about loyalty, the impact on family dynamics, and how much Elizabeth would blame Chuck for the unknown truths he may have kept. Elizabeth's anger was raw, almost electric. It wasn't just about biology. It was about trust, consistency, and the illusion of certainty she had lived with for decades. She wanted to scream, cry, demand answers, and simultaneously flee. She kept reading the results, as if doing so could somehow reconcile what her mind refused to accept. Every paragraph she reread made the shock sharper, every statistic a reminder that what she thought she knew about her life was incomplete. Psychologically, this moment is one of the most destabilizing experiences a person can have. Your identity is tied to the people you trust most. When that trust fractures, it triggers an internal storm, anger, grief, confusion, and a desperate need for control. Elizabeth's mind was spinning through scenarios, replaying childhood memories, questioning each milestone. Was that advice genuine? Was that pride authentic? Every moment with Chuck now felt both precious and tainted. And the fallout began immediately. Words were spoken and regretted. Gestures misread. A slight look from Chuck was interpreted as guilt. Pam's hesitation became betrayal. Each family member navigated the fallout differently, creating micro-conflicts layered on top of the central emotional earthquake. Miscommunications exploded, showing how fragile the connections had been even before the revelation. Elizabeth questioned everything, every childhood story, every family ritual, every narrative she had been told. She asked herself how her parents could have carried this secret and why they chose to wait until now. What was the point of protecting her if protection came at the cost of her identity? Each answer she imagined only deepened her confusion. Chuck tried to explain, but his words faltered under the weight of the revelation. Pam attempted to soothe, but fear overpowered her empathy. Andre interjected occasionally, trying to mediate without taking sides, but his restraint sometimes read as indifference. The house, once filled with ordinary warmth, felt charged with tension. Every glance, every pause, every half-spoken word became a test. Elizabeth's anger occasionally flared toward Andre, a misdirected frustration born from the absence of answers. Andre's careful neutrality was now a source of irritation. Why isn't anyone being honest? She thought. Why am I the only one who seems to need the truth right now? The combination of shock, betrayal, and confusion pushed her to a brink she hadn't anticipated. Even social media began to play a role. Fans and followers who had been invested in her story immediately speculated, sharing theories and questioning decisions. Each notification felt like a ripple from the epicenter of her personal earthquake. Public attention amplified private pain, adding a layer of scrutiny and pressure that complicated the emotional landscape. Elizabeth's internal dialogue oscillated between self-restraint and explosive confrontation. Should she demand explanations now, or wait to gather more information? Each option had consequences, and each choice was weighted with the potential to either heal or fracture her family further. The Dina results were just the first act in a cascade of revelations that would follow. But even this first truth had already changed everything. Psychologically, Chuck's silence and Pam's fear created a paradox. Silence was meant to protect, but it now exacerbated tension, making Elizabeth's emotional storm more intense. Every measured movement, every carefully chosen word, was interpreted as evidence, motive, or guilt. Trust, once implicit, had to be rebuilt from scratch. As Elizabeth processed the shock, small betrayals became apparent. A forgotten conversation here, a withheld detail there, tiny omissions that had once seemed inconsequential now looked like intentional deception. The family's cohesion was tested not just by the truth itself, but by how each member responded to it. Each reaction revealed hidden priorities, loyalties, and fears. Elizabeth's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Would her relationship with Chuck survive this? Could Pam recover trust? Was Andre truly neutral or silently taking sides? And beyond family, how would the public perceive her now, given the dramatic reveal? Each thought compounded the weight on her chest, creating a mental whirlwind of anticipation, doubt, and frustration. The beauty and terror of this moment were its unpredictability. Unlike a scripted drama, real lives don't pause, rewind, or provide comforting resolutions. Every response had consequences. Every choice had ripple effects, both seen and unseen. Elizabeth had stepped into uncharted territory, and the Dina results were merely the first step on a journey that would challenge every assumption she had about family, loyalty, and identity. But here's where it gets even messier. One truth leads to three new questions. Her next step was uncertain. Should she confront Chuck directly or probe Pam first? Could she involve Andre as a mediator or risk escalating tension further? Each pathway had risks, each decision had weight. The Dina results didn't just answer a question, they created a labyrinth of choices, forcing Elizabeth to navigate between curiosity, anger, and the fragile threads of trust that had kept her family together until now. The house was quieter now, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that presses down on every interaction. Elizabeth's gaze no longer sought reassurance, but measured each reaction, weighing honesty against evasion. Trust, once implicit, was now a fragile thread. Chuck moved cautiously around her, every word carefully considered, but love alone couldn't erase the betrayal she felt. The bond they shared had been built on decades of assumed truths, and now each smile or gesture carried the potential for misunderstanding. Even small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a glance across the room, felt loaded with unspoken history. Pam oscillated between guilt and fear. Every conversation with Elizabeth became a delicate dance, a negotiation of intent and apology. Her attempts to explain her silence often faltered, leaving gaps that Elizabeth couldn't fill. The protection that had once seemed caring now appeared controlling. Meanwhile, Andre continued his role as observer, stepping in only when tension threatened to explode, trying to mediate without taking sides. His calmness offered a thin thread of stability, but even that was tested as emotions ran hotter with each passing day. Outside the home, social media exploded. Fans dissected every frame of the episode, every public post, every cryptic comment. Elizabeth's Instagram and TikTok accounts saw a flood of comments, some supportive, some critical. A tweet from a longtime follower read, "I can't believe Chuck kept this from Elizabeth all these years. How do you even recover from that?" Others debated motives, timelines, and personal responsibility. The public scrutiny created another layer of pressure, forcing the family to navigate not just private emotions, but public perception. Elizabeth's journey became about reclaiming her own story. Her anger and confusion gradually shifted toward agency. She began making decisions on what to ask, when to confront, and how to process the truth on her own terms. It wasn't just about uncovering biological facts anymore. It was about asserting her right to clarity, to make sense of a world that had suddenly been turned upside down. Every interaction tested her ability to balance emotional honesty with strategic patience, forcing her to grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. Chuck's love, as profound as it was, faced its limits. No amount of devotion could instantly erase the cognitive dissonance Elizabeth felt. His protective silence, once framed as care, now appeared as part of a web of secrecy she had to untangle. The clash between love and truth became starkly visible. Emotional bonds were tested against hard facts, and Elizabeth was forced to navigate the tension between what she felt and what she now knew. The ripple effects extended beyond emotion. Conversations turned cautious, routines shifted, and the family's dynamic was permanently altered. Every meeting, every casual chat carried weight. The past could no longer be assumed. Each memory was now subject to scrutiny. And even as they tried to stabilize, the search for clarity continued. Legal proceedings were being prepared to confirm paternity, NA labs were involved, and the search for her biological father was beginning to take shape. The story that started with a single envelope of results had now expanded into a full-scale journey of discovery, accountability, and uncertainty. You will not believe how this next step complicates everything. Elizabeth's next moves would set the tone for the coming weeks. Would she meet her biological father? Would Chuck and Pam's relationship with her survive unscathed? Could Andre's measured approach help hold the family together? Or would his neutrality be seen as detachment? Each choice had consequences, each interaction a test of resilience and trust. The family had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back to the days when everything felt simple, safe, and unquestioned. Elizabeth sat with a folder in her lap. Every page a potential key to a past she barely understood. Each new lead, each phone call, each hesitant conversation with distant relatives brought a mix of hope and anxiety. She wanted answers, but she also feared what those answers might reveal. The curiosity that had been simmering for months now burned hotter, pushing her toward truths that had been hidden for decades. Every moment felt heavy, as if the weight of untold secrets had been waiting for her to pull them into the light. Her mind wandered back to small inconsistencies from childhood, things she had dismissed at the time. A forgotten birthday, a vague explanation, a social media post that never made sense. Each memory now felt like a puzzle piece, and the image it formed was starting to feel unfamiliar. It wasn't just the idea of a different biological father that shook her, it was the realization that her understanding of family had been constructed on partial truths. The psychological toll was enormous. Questions she never thought to ask became impossible to ignore. Every call, every text, every meeting with potential relatives carried the possibility of both connection and heartbreak. Chuck and Pam remained in the background, walking a careful line. Chuck's love for Elizabeth was undeniable, but his silence and prior omissions added a layer of tension he couldn't simply erase. Pam, torn between guilt and protective instinct, struggled to watch Elizabeth push forward. Their roles shifted subtly. The people who had once been her entire world now felt both supportive and obstructive. And Andre, ever the observer, tried to stay neutral, but even he could not fully shield Elizabeth from the emotional turbulence that came with pursuing the truth. Family loyalty clashed with the desire for clarity at every turn. Some relatives urged caution, warning Elizabeth about digging too deep. Others offered fragmented clues that only intensified the mystery. Every conversation carried stakes. Every minor revelation raised more questions than answers. The search wasn't just logistical. It was a test of character, patience, and emotional resilience. Elizabeth found herself oscillating between determination and doubt, wondering whether she had the strength to face what lay ahead. As the days unfolded, small twists kept the tension rising. A potential lead turned out to be a dead end. Another source offered information that conflicted with what she already knew. Each discrepancy forced her to question not only others, but herself. Did she really want the truth? Or had she unconsciously feared it all along? Every decision carried emotional consequences, shaping her personality in real time. Her curiosity was now inseparable from a heightened vigilance, a constant scanning of behavior, tone, and intent from everyone around her. The legal and emotional stakes intertwined. Dina confirmation was imminent, but the journey to that point was already reshaping her sense of identity. Family dinners, casual interactions, even text messages were now tinted with caution. Relationships that had seemed straightforward were now layered with uncertainty, and Elizabeth had to learn to navigate each one carefully. Her journey wasn't just about finding her biological father, it was about understanding herself and the effects of decades of secrecy and selective truths. The next revelation could change how she sees everyone forever. Elizabeth realized she was no longer simply searching for a name or a face. She was confronting the boundaries of love, loyalty, and trust. Every discovery had the power to strengthen or fracture bonds. And as she inched closer to the truth, the tension escalated. What she would learn next could redefine the family she thought she knew and force all of them to reckon with what loyalty and honesty truly meant. By the time Elizabeth paused to breathe, the full weight of everything hit her. The search, the revelations, the tangled emotions, they weren't just abstract ideas anymore. Family dinners that once felt normal now carried tension. Glances that once seemed innocent now hinted at unspoken truths. Her relationships with Chuck, Pam, and Andre had changed subtly but irrevocably. Trust felt fragile, as if it could shatter with a single misstep. What had once been unconditional love now required navigation, negotiation, and an acute awareness of the past shadow. Elizabeth's sense of self had shifted too. Learning that her biological father was not Chuck forced her to redefine her identity, not in terms of rebellion or resentment, but in the quiet, painful work of integrating fact with emotion. She grappled with questions that had no easy answers. Was love enough to define a family? Or was truth indispensable? Could she reconcile the man who raised her with the reality of who her biological father was? The answers weren't simple, and the process wasn't neat. It demanded emotional labor, patience, and introspection that left her exhausted yet oddly empowered. The psychological strain extended beyond Elizabeth. Chuck wrestled with guilt and his role in shielding her from truth. Pam wrestled with fear of disruption and judgment. Andre, usually the steady anchor, now had to adapt to waves of emotion he couldn't control. Each person's response was a mirror, reflecting not just the family dynamics, but the ways secrecy, protection, and love intertwine in complex, sometimes destructive, patterns. It became clear that silence, even when motivated by care, carries consequences that ripple across lives in ways no one anticipates. Fans online had their say, analyzing every facial expression, every hesitation, every social media post. The public reaction mirrored Elizabeth's private journey, shock, debate, and a desperate desire to assign meaning or responsibility. Yet beyond the gossip, the central questions remain deeply human. How do you forgive someone whose love was intertwined with deception? Can trust ever fully recover after such a seismic shift in perception? Elizabeth's story became a reflection of those questions, giving viewers a mirror to examine their own limits of tolerance, empathy, and resilience. Her journey toward autonomy had been hard-earned. She had moved from passive recipient of family narratives to an active seeker of truth. She discovered that agency comes not from controlling others, but from taking responsibility for understanding one's own history and emotional responses. Each decision, each step, was a lesson in patience, courage, and emotional intelligence. It was not about revenge or resentment. It was about reclaiming clarity and ownership of her life. The next episode promises more drama as hidden truths come to light. Even as she processed what she had learned, Elizabeth knew this wasn't the end. There were more conversations to have, more confirmations to seek, and a biological father yet to meet. The path forward was uncertain, emotionally fraught, and full of possibility. Every character had to confront the consequences of past choices, and Elizabeth's courage would continue to be tested. In the coming episodes, loyalty, love, and honesty would collide, forcing each person to decide what matters most when the ground beneath them has shifted so dramatically. The ripple effects of this revelation weren't just immediate. They were only beginning to unfold. Elizabeth finally found a quiet moment to breathe, a rare pause in the whirlwind of revelations and emotions. She looked around her family and realized that clarity doesn't always come with comfort, but it comes with choice. For the first time, she felt her voice matter, her questions valid, and her decisions hers to make. The weight of uncertainty still hung heavy, but owning her story gave her a sense of control she hadn't known before. Even as she took this step, the family remained entangled in tension. Chuck's love was unwavering, yet unspoken truths lingered like shadows. Pam's fear of disruption hadn't vanished, and Andre's measured restraint couldn't shield her from the emotional fallout. The Dina revelation was only the beginning, and every interaction was now a negotiation between past protections and present honesty. Viewers should brace themselves, because the next installment promises even higher stakes. Court proceedings, confrontations with the biological father, and social media reactions are all on the horizon, each carrying the potential to reshape what Elizabeth and her family thought they knew about each other. Next time, one shocking meeting changes everything you thought you knew.